listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft, the people who play it. Today is June 7th, 2022, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to our podcast. I am joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing on this fine Tuesday?
Spencer, hello. Here we are, 1 week deep into 925 and a brand new World of Warcraft, if you will.
Yeah.
A little bit of a rocky week, but not totally unexpected, right? Like, I think we said something to the effect of, like, we're in very long maintenance last Tuesday. We recorded during very long maintenance. And
yes.
We said something to the effect of, like, this patch could just break the game, so it's going to take however long it takes.
And it did.
It kind of did, yeah. It did for a little bit. And, you know, there's still some stuff they're fixing, but... Yep. You know, this is not a simple switch to flip, I'm sure, to undo this structure that was built into the game from day one. I think overall, you know, a lot of the changes that 925 have brought are really welcome. Hopefully, everybody who had issues with guilds disappearing and stuff have had that resolved. You know, there's still some wonkiness with some cross-faction instance groups, which we'll talk about. I actually didn't end up doing any cross-faction stuff. I know some people from my guild are interested in maining like horde characters, like faction swapping the character that they main with us. They haven't yet, which honestly was probably a good idea not to get in the queue for those services last week if you could wait a little bit, because who knows, you know, you might end up breaking something or with the server instability, and then you might end up with like a character that you can't play at raid time. So I don't know. We'll see if anybody starts doing that, but yeah, you know, we had a lot of extra maintenance. Like maintenance was really long on Tuesday. It ended up costing us Tuesday night raid because servers didn't come up to like 9 p.m. when usually we end at 9:30. We had maintenance on Wednesday and Thursday, and I think maybe some more. I can't exactly remember, but yeah, I mean, no big surprises. We had a little bit of extended maintenance today. This is just the fallout of, you know, changes this large, and this is why you do them in a .5 patch instead of a big content drop or a new expansion.
Yeah, I mean, it's overall last week was a bit of a wash when it came to a lot of the raid nights, simply because we only had that 1 hour of raid time for our team working on Mythic Jailer on Tuesday. We did prog through Jailer through the week, and last night we saw Phase 4, so we're at that point where the boss will die tonight or tomorrow, which is super exciting. But we had a lot of early wipes, and a lot of them were due to like DCs or stuff malfunctioning in the game, or the jailer room itself has some issues with every single one of the holes that you run and jump into with a bomb has a lip around it. The silver sort of outline octagon thing that's around it is actually another texture layered on top of the floor texture, which also has other textures on it. And so you end up with a lot of things of like people getting stuck or blinking and disconnecting, or, you know, dashing as a demon hunter and disconnecting. You can run into that stuff a lot, which on a fight that affordance isn't really high with the bombs can wipe your raid very, very quickly. So we just had a bad week when it came to Phase 1 wipes. But what was reassuring yesterday was when we did get out of Phase 1, we got to end of Phase 3 towards Phase 4. So Phase 2 was clean, Phase 3 was clean, and so we'd start to see Phase 4. And so that felt really good. I think it just emphasizes that Phase 1 of that fight just needs a bit more affordance to actually make that fight feel good and feel like it's well to be progressed. It's like, well, if same thing with Anduin, kind of with that initial blasphemy that goes out, right? If just by increasing the timer on that by a little bit, suddenly it increases the affordance, and you stop seeing as many Phase 1 wipes. And that is just something that I think they need to sort of have a look at with Jailer for making it more accessible for more teams in the future. I don't want it now. I want us to kill it now before they do that. But, you know, that'll be one of the changes I think they could make that would certainly help that fight out a lot. I did go and do all of the new quest stuff that came out last week, which was super exciting. And
really good stuff, actually. Really good story being woven there.
Yeah. And I mean, minor spoilers, but something that was cool that I'm glad they sort of delved into was essentially using the Necrolords and their knowledge of Plague to sort of manipulate Plague and stuff back on Azeroth. I think that is really cool that that's finally coming out of this, because there were so many things that you sort of hope would come out of the people of Azeroth visiting essentially this other world, right? Like, do the aliens have a gift to give us that we can bring back to our people that will, you know, enhance our quality of life, right? And I feel like there very much is that happening now, and they're sort of starting to embrace that. So I'm excited to see if they do any more story beats, but primarily just the concept of, and I use the Plague as an example of us bringing back some of the advancements, some of the technology, some of the knowledge from Shadowlands to Azeroth to make Azeroth, or at least to solve some of Azeroth's woes, is a very cool thing that we're starting to see. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and you know what? I kind of had the same feeling when I was doing that part of the quest, and it really ties back to something I said a couple weeks ago when I had done the Necrolord campaign for the first time. I really feel like the Necrolord campaign is like the main story of Shadowlands, or at least like 9.0 into 9.1. Like, the level up campaign is one thing, and that kind of sets the table, but the Necrolord campaign is really what ties all the stuff together into 9.1 and 9.2 content, and then kind of puts a bow on it in 9.2.5. So if you've never done that stuff, like if Necrolord's never appealed to you, or you haven't played it because it wasn't like a good choice for your spec, you should give it a shot. Like, I think there's really some interesting stuff and some really cool characters baked into that Covenant campaign.
Yeah.
And I think the 9.2.5 stuff that came, the Lordaeron stuff from last week, really reinforced that for me.
Yeah. It's super neat to see story in World of Warcraft being interesting and involving Azeroth again. You know, that's just, I guess, part of it for me.
Yeah, right. It makes it feel like it really closes a loop a lot, because I mean, a lot of the Necrolord campaign is characters we know from Azeroth, really front and center, and so then it kind of loops back around. So yeah, I mean, we could do a whole series on the problems and dislikes we have with Shadowlands story, but there are good beats, and you know, I think there's been more good beats than bad ones lately. That's my opinion.
Well, I agree, and I did the Necrolord campaign a long while back, and I think it's a fantastic campaign. I just enjoy that we're now starting to see, okay, now that we're moving back towards Azeroth, what is it that we are going to have gained as a society, or as, you know, what are the people of Azeroth going to have gained having visited Shadowlands and been in this unique, different culture and space with more advanced technologies and whatever it is, or technologies that are more advanced in other fields, or knowledge that's, you know, deeper and more shared from many different cultures and societies. And so sort of like, what are we bringing back to Azeroth, I think, is the question that's starting to be answered. And I think that's exciting to see what, you know, could happen with that in the future. So yeah, that was cool. I definitely enjoyed that storyline stuff. That was neat. Outside of that, like I said, I streamed all of my raid stuff last week, and I actually streamed showing my Covenant Shuffle for those who were curious as to what that looked like. So people were able to check out, hey, this is what I do when I get 10,000 anima, and this is, you know, the benefits of doing it, and the sort of cheesy stuff you can do. Like my favorite one is the Anima Conductor, where the Anima Conductor energy is shared amongst all Anima Conductors, which means you can essentially go on to Kyrian, you know, empower 3 places, that gives you 3 energy. Go on to Necrolord, empower 6 places, that gives you 6 more. Go on to, you know, Venthyr, empower 1 spot, and then suddenly you can reinforce a spot and do that all inside one rotation, because you've essentially all the energy shared. So I really enjoy that that's an aspect to the game, and it's kind of a neat thing to watch someone do. So wanted to show that off and show that worked, and show how basically my Night Fae stuff is I do my missions on my mission table to get the experience tokens, and then just bank up a week or 2 weeks worth of experience tokens, and then just dump them all into another Covenant's followers to sort of max them out. So I'm at the point now where, I mean, I've obviously had Night Fae max for a while. Venthyr, I'm just like 3 heroes away, I think.
Wow.
And they're all in their 40s. So like, we're getting close to having Venthyr full mission table unlocked, full followers unlocked situation, which is kind of crazy.
That's almost unthinkable.
Yeah, so that's just from doing tokens. And then I know all of my Kyrian people are in their 30s, because that's where I left them long ago. So I'll have to, you know, start dumping stuff into Kyrian, and then eventually I'll dump stuff into Necrolord. And this, you know, depends on how long we're in the patch for, but might end up with all maxed out mission tables. Who knows?
Right.
It's just one of those neat things where I guess I felt like depending on what they choose to do as far as our classes go and balance goes and tuning goes and everything else with the new season starting, we'll see if I remain where I remain as far as covenants go or what happens with that. One of the things we're going to be talking about later in the show, so a little teaser for that, is the Dragonflight talent preview stuff that came out, and one of the classes they previewed was Druid. So I could actually talk to a little bit about some of that talent tree stuff that's kind of exciting or interesting, or seeing what they choose to do with it. So that'll be fun later on in the show. But Jason, is there anything else you did last week that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really busy week, actually. I mean, obviously with patch and stuff and new stuff to do. Even with, losing most of Tuesday did hurt, but I fully expected it. It would be disingenuous to say I was disappointed. I expected maintenance to be extended long beyond, 6 p.m. Eastern, and it was. We ended up getting a bunch of dungeons in. There were some people who logged on at 9, and it's like, well, we're not going to raid because by the time we get assembled and get in there, it'll be time to stop. So we banged out a bunch of dungeons, and I did get up to 2981 Mythic Plus rating by the end of the week. I pushed my two worst fort dungeons off the board, got 20s in time in both of those. So I just need a little luck with Keystones this week. If I could get a Plague Fall, my highest Plague Fall Tyrannical is 15 untimed, probably from week 1.
Man, that's like 60 or 70 rating. Like that's easy.
Potentially, yeah. Like I think if I get that Plague Fall situated, I'll probably be okay. And if I need to eke out like a couple points somewhere, there's a couple other ones I could do that are like at 19s. I'd love to get that done this week just to get the achievement, get the conduit upgrades, and then just to, then I don't have to worry about it. Like whatever. Then we're in low friction mode with M+, right? When somebody wants to do it, we do it. We do whatever seems like the most fun one to do. Nobody's shooting for any particular gear. Nobody's shooting for rating. So, we're almost there. A bunch of people that I play with have cracked 3K in the last couple weeks because they pug more than I do, which is to say at all. But me and one other guy, we're still plugging away. So this might be the week. Wednesday, we cleaned up Mythic Skolex without too much trouble. It felt pretty good. I mean, it was a little dicey. We did it probably not in a great way because we 5-healed it with like not really all of our superstar DPS. I wasn't really sure it was going to be killable because we were missing. I mean, I was missing like legitimately one of my best single target damage players who's also strong mechanically, and it's like, well, without him, like, can we kill any bosses, especially prog mythic single target fights? Like, I don't know. Can we do this with 5 healers? And if the answer is no, we don't have enough time, then can we survive with the 4 healers we have left? And I wasn't sure about that either. We used Vantis runes and stuff, and then we ended up having just, once we got a really clean pull off and everybody did the dance well, we killed it with like, I don't know, 15 or 18 seconds to spare. No, not even that much. We killed it with like 30 seconds to spare under the hard and rage, when before we were hard and raging and the boss beat like 1 to 3%. So cleaning it up and just keeping people alive, keeping people a little bit more optimal really made a big difference. So that was great. Nobody else in our realm is killing any mythic bosses. So I think our server ranking is secure at number 1 for whatever it's worth. I mean, it's cool to have it. But we will not end up with Realm first ahead of the curve because somebody else killed Heroic Jailer this week.
Right.
We did have a whole night to just work on Heroic Jailer, and I think we're just going to work on Heroic Jailer from here on out. We're starting to get the hang of the Phase 1 dance, and Phase 1 seems a lot more hectic than Phase 2. So I think as we can get through Phase 1 more cleanly, then we can optimize Phase 2 a bit better and get some more damage in before Phase 3 starts. We were losing people a lot to just bad positioning, and positioning is so important in Phase 1. People getting bounced off the stage because of knockbacks and, bombs, and then they come out of a bomb hole and down another one, or, directly into the dead center of the room or off the edge or whatever, or they end up somewhere they don't expect and then they can't avoid the mind control. So, a lot of these bosses in this raid you can't really afford to lose somebody early on, especially when you're progging, because it just starts this kind of snowball. And I felt like that was happening to us a bunch. Like having somebody get MC'd means you have to waste a ton of damage breaking that MC, which then kills them. So you're down their damage for the entire rest of the fight, plus you just lost a ton of damage killing them, and just, yeah. So I think we're just extending, and the raid is so large, the fights are so punishing, the rewards aren't particularly great or attractive to anybody at this point. I don't see any reason to push reclears for weeks and then squeeze in whatever jailer time we can. We want to learn jailer, we want to kill jailer, so we're just going to do that, I think. Other than that, since the Renown 60 items came in, I decided to get to Renown 60 on the warrior on all 4 covenants, which I did. And then I was working on Kyrian because I think Kyrian is like the big option that I want to be able to switch to. I got to Renown 80. And I unlocked all the Sanctum upgrades, so I have everything done in that regard. I can switch, depending on what I want to use, and not feel like I'm losing out on much. I got to say, farming the souls for all the Sanctum upgrades did not feel great. That was not too much fun. It was very tedious, but
yeah,
I doubled up on it a bit because now you get Renown guaranteed for Layer 9 Torghast, which you can pretty much just sleepwalk through if you're in current gear. So I just did a bunch of Layer 9 Torghast. I went to Skoldus Hall because it's very simple layouts. And, then I'd go pick up 3-4 more souls out in the maw, go turn it in, come back, do it again. The worst part was I didn't have the Ouroboros portal unlocked, so it was a lot of flight paths. But it's all done for that covenant for now. And I think I'm probably done with that for the time being. I want to max out the other covenants at some point, but it's a lot of maintenance to switch back and forth, and it's a little disorienting to me. So I think I'm gonna just stick with what I got for now and add the other 2 on later. Also, I had to go out to Darkmoon Fair because I wanted my last couple points of engineering on the Hunter, and I did the dance game finally.
Excellent.
Yeah, and so I got the toy, I got all the achievements and stuff. It was fun. The presentation's really cool. It looks great. The hard mode was kind of hard, I definitely was saying out loud the names of the colors. Yeah, I would have to remember what I just said. That was my method to doing it. I don't think I'll ever do it again though. It's once you do that, it's kind of just it's cool. It's there. It's done. But I don't think I'll be participating anymore. But it was fun to do, and getting the toy is cool. I also did the Heritage Weapon Quest in the Dark Iron, which is nice because it's very short and sweet. You just mole machine yourself down into Shadowforge City. All the NPCs you need are down there. You talk to them, you run around a little bit, and then you get these sweet looking weapons, a one-hander, a shield, and a two-hander that, they look perfect with the Dark Iron Heritage armor. So if you didn't get around to that last week and you have a Dark Iron and you have the Heritage armor, highly recommend, because, man, I had some nice stuff to kind of match the aesthetic, but it's not the same thing as stuff that's designed with it. Plus, you get the unique mount. The mount looks really cool, too, and it looks great with the whole set put together on the mount. Kind of makes me want to play my Dark Iron higher than level 51 a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the other big thing that I just discovered last night, I want to mention this specifically because I didn't realize this. All right, so there are Cypher gear weapons in the game now, and you can get them from daily quests, from world quests, from chests and rare drops once you have the quest unlocked. The quest unlocks from an item. It's a disc. I forget exactly what it's called, but an item drops. It starts a quest when you kill mobs in Zereth Mortis. You take it to the Jiro vendor or one of the NPCs near the Jiro vendor outside of Farim's cave, and then it unlocks, and then you just get quests that roll these rewards where they can drop. There wasn't a lot of messaging around how this worked, okay? And I took some things for granted. I figured it was account-wide because I killed a couple mobs on my warrior. I got the thing immediately. I turned it in, and I said, okay, cool. And then I never got the quest item or any weapon rewards on any of my other characters all week long. I'm like, what's going on here? What have I done wrong? I did a little bit of research, a little bit of wowhead comments to the rescue. You have to do the Broken Circle quest chain with the Jiro in Zereth Mortis that unlocks that vendor per character in order to be able to get the quest item, because it gets turned into one of those NPCs as the quest turn in NPC, and then that unlocks the feature. So this is something I wish I had known last Tuesday, Wednesday, because I wasted a lot of time this week switching characters around going, why the hell is the warrior the only one that's getting a weapon from this? And yeah, weird. That's why. So now I got another thing on my list for my alt stable. The alts desperately need weapons. Yeah. The 226, 229 weapons are not cutting it. So just a little FYI for anybody out there that is that was in that same boat with me up to this point. Yeah, make sure you have the Jiro vendor fully unlocked on the characters that you want the Cypher Gear weapons on. You got to do it per character, got to do it repeatedly. But then, those are pretty nice rewards for very little effort, right? I mean, it's normal rate equivalent for outdoor stuff. I'll take that every time. I didn't know that I had to do that part.
Right. Yeah, I know. Sometimes those things being gated like that certainly make it challenging to figure out which piece of the thread you've missed, right? Like there's something here that is causing me not to see this drop. What is it? And, well, at least you figured it out and you can share it with everybody else.
I could tell there was some piece of the puzzle missing, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. So there you go.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, is that everything you want to chat about last week? We're going to dive into this week.
Yeah, I mean, big week last week. It's always cool when a new patch comes out. There were some cool surprises. I mean, we knew there was going to be some stuff that we didn't know what it was, but I think the whole Lordaeron thing and all the new cosmetics were not really what anybody suspected. So that was awesome.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right, this week is your Battleground bonus event where the Sign of Battle is up, increasing honor games from Battleground objectives and wins by 50%. And, of course, a quest to win 4 random Battlegrounds, which gives you Marks of Honor, Anima, and Conquest. So if Battlegrounds are your thing, you can dive into that. The next thing we got going on is, of course, the stuff you don't want to miss inside of Oribos. So we have a new deal, the weekly War Mode quest you can pick up. And turn on War Mode, head into Zereth Mortis, and get some extra completion towards your Patterns Within Patterns quest, which is the weekly quest you pick up in Zereth Mortis, just for completing activities within Zereth Mortis, including world quests, killing the big boss that's up in there, Antros. All of those contribute towards Patterns Within Patterns, and of course, a new deal is worth 35% towards that if that's something you are willing to do. So certainly something we recommend doing. Staying on the PvP front, we have rated battlegrounds and arena skirmishes as the quests you can pick up in Oribos if either of those pique your interest. And dungeon quests you can find in the basement of the inn in Oribos are Plaguefall and Mists of Tyrnacythe. So if either of those are something you're going to run this week, I know Jason's looking for a Plaguefall. Might as well pick up that quest before you go and try and get that rating.
I wish the quest would give you a keystone at your current difficulty.
That would be interesting.
Indicated dungeon,
right?
Like,
that's interesting.
Man, I need that Plaguefall 20 to show up. I might have to pug because it's that desperate. But yeah, little extra bone. Even if you don't need Plaguefall as badly as I do, you still get something cool if you do it this week, as long as you pick up the quest first.
Yeah, I wonder, that would be a neat feature too, even if it dropped your keystone by 1 level or something, for you to be able to accept this quest and choose to turn your keystone into one of these dungeons would be kind of a neat thing.
It should be random, right? So it'd just be like, because from what I can tell, there's no set rotation on the dungeon quests.
Yeah,
they double up sometimes, and so that tells me that it just kind of picks 2 of them. So yeah, I don't know, why not? It's another layer of randomness, but that would be a cool way to handle that if you're targeting a specific key.
Yeah, I mean, you wait for that. I mean, you don't have to wait, but you can be running keys, and if you just can't happen to get the proper dungeon to pop, and then the weekly quest comes around, it's a way to sort of help with that RNG aspect a little bit of trying to nail down those dungeons. All right, weekly world bosses: Nurgash, the Muck Form, the Big Dredger, and Revendreth. And Jason, last time this guy was up, we actually learned something about his legendaries.
We did, yeah. So Nurgash has Frenzied Monstrosity for DKs, Erratic Felkor for DHs, and Ajikir's Madness for Warlocks. We've been saying Erratic Felkor was for Warlocks for a really long time because I probably grabbed the loot table from some early implementation on some website and it was wrong and never got changed. And nobody ever told us that it was wrong. So there you go. Nurgash is DKs, DHs, and Warlocks. Go get your memories this week. Guaranteed drops. Fill out that UI panel and make it happen.
Yeah, props to the individual that reached out to us on Twitter and said, hey, by the way, I just started leveling a DH, and Erratic Felkor is a DH legendary. I know you've been saying it's been Warlock for a while. And we're like, oh, yeah, whoops, that's on us. Sorry, guys. So, yeah.
It's amazing it took that long.
It is.
I can't remember who it was that reached out to us, but thanks.
Thank you. All right. Other than that, we have world bosses for Morgeth and Antros. Both of them, all 3 world bosses give you a bunch of animus. They're worth killing. But Antros drops that 259 gear, so be sure that you are getting your 259 upgrades or upgrades for your alts off of Antros for the week. Okay. Mythic Plus, Tyrannical, Raging, and Volcanic. means bosses have more health and inflict more damage. Non-boss enemies enrage at 30% health, inflicting increased damage until defeated. And while in combat, enemies periodically cause gouts of flame to erupt beneath the feet of distant players. I mean, this is not terrible. Like, raging is not on a fortified week, which means these mobs are going to die fairly quickly below 30% health. So, it's not as much of an affix as you worry about. Plus, raging can be dispelled. So if you do have a situation where a particular aggressive, angry, large mob is, just hitting that 30% health mark, you can dispel it. I'm thinking of mobs in that walk around and actually do the raging blood ability in the other side. That's what I was thinking of. Those guys you want to dispel right away.
Big berserkers,
the berserkers. You don't want them yelling with increased damage. It's very bad. So those ones you want to hit immediately just to be sure. So those dispels are great. That's your druids and your hunters and your rogues who can get rid of that. And then volcanic again, like it's another one of those mechanics that all you have to do is just watch your feet. So this is probably the best tyrannical week you will see in this entire rotation. I don't think you're going to find a better tyrannical week than this.
Yeah, I can't really disagree. I think this is a really good combo for pushing rating. As we always say, tyrannical has its pitfalls, right? Because the bosses are hard, and you may end up at an unkillable boss because you just don't have the necessary throughput to survive long enough to make the boss die. But there's so much power available and stuff. Like if you're around the range of keys you're comfortable with, you got to push pretty far to run into that. I feel like at this point, the only thing I would say here, the only thing to be aware of is that volcanic will happen during boss fights, and because of the way volcanic works, any enemy can proc a volcanic on any player that is distant from it. So this could present some problems on fights like second boss in Mists of Tyrannosaith, last boss in Plaguefall, where ads pop up all over the room. I guess even third boss in Mists of Tyrannosaith. You could get really distant ads appear, but then they're viable volcanic I don't want to say targets. I don't know. They can create volcanics, right?
Yeah.
And then even like if you're the tank or you're in the melee stack, you're far from those. So now you may have volcanics in melee of the boss because the ad is putting them underneath of you. So that can be disruptive. I mean, volcanic doesn't hurt that bad these days. It's a displacement thing, which can be obnoxious. I mean, it could be really bad in something like last boss of Plaguefall, right? Because you have an ad, it's across the way from the boss from you, it pops a volcanic on you, you don't catch it in time, and you get bounced, and now you're going to get slapped with a tentacle. Like, that could happen.
Yeah.
But, I mean, these are very edge cases. There are much worse combos that you're going to see. I'm just trying to say, like, this is, like, the worst overlaps that I can envision this week with Tyrannical Raging Volcanic. I think it's a really good week to go get some Tyrannical rating, and I'm hoping to do that for myself, so I can meet my goal for dungeons for the season. So, yeah, I think it's going to be great to get out there and tackle these dungeons this week.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to pushing some Tyrannical because this is very forgiving. So I'm super excited. All right.
Yeah.
PvP Brawl for the week is Classic Ashran, meaning that this is basically the original Ashran battle that goes on and on and on for hours, and has massive events that require you to donate large sums of gathered artifact fragments to, create buffs and create creatures and make allies to be able to push back in Ashran. It's a ridiculous, huge, crazy brawl. It's a little weird one to have something different in as a quest because it's for winning a PvP brawl. You'd have to be in Classic Ashran for a very long time to win. So I don't really know how this is going to work. But if you want to experience some Classic Ashran, you can. It was not something I super enjoyed. I do know people who did really enjoy it and loved it, and it was like their favorite thing. So maybe it's good nostalgia for those people. They can get back in there again and have some fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Ashran as it existed as like essentially a zone in Warlords of Draenor is a lot different than its implementation as an epic BG in the current game. So this is kind of just recapturing that a bit. I agree with you. It's weird as a brawl. I feel like it should just be a separate mode, kind of, because it doesn't. Most of the other brawls are here's a wacky PvP thing, and these are mostly quick games.
Yeah.
And here's this weekly quest that's very lucrative for doing it, for participating in this quick game mode and winning. That does not. Classic Ashran doesn't line up with any of those sort of design elements that the other ones have. I feel like this could be its own separate category, but maybe the problem there would be queue times would be outrageous. So, I don't know. I will not be stepping into Classic Ashran this week.
Yeah. All right. With that, we're going to move on to the 1,000 Boat Bash, which is happening tomorrow. We reminded you last week because we wanted to be sure you were prepared and got yourself all ready for it. But yeah, it kicks off tomorrow.
It is live now. It started yesterday. It runs through. Yeah. It runs through tomorrow.
So it ends tomorrow. Get in there now before it goes away. What am I saying? Yes, it's currently live, and get out there, get your questing done, because it's a really cool quest line to experience. Or just pick up your boat and get to ride around for the next 7 days, which is kind of cool. So enjoy that. Yeah, cool. Definitely a fun one. All right, Darkmoon Faire.
If you can find some water in the Shadowlands, that's the only problem.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's some areas they just don't go anywhere. There's like lakes. Right. They aren't like, rivers that travel along, or like a shoreline that you can experience. Or it's not really anything there.
Can you ride your boat along like the slime in Maldraxxus?
It'd be great. That'd be cool. I'd be down for that. Let's do that. Let's make a daily quest in Maldraxxus where you use a boat inside the slime. I'd be down with that.
Slime boat, yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Darkmoon Faire. It's going to be live through the 11th, so be sure that you are getting down to Darkmoon Faire and taking advantage of getting that dance toy like Jason did, or get some extra experience and reputation, or getting some profession skill ups done. Lots to do there that you can do. So head on down to Darkmoon Faire. All right. Dragonflight preview. So this came out last week. There were two different things. One was the talent system design philosophy, which is what we're going to spend the most time sort of highlighting. And the other was, hey, here's a couple of trees to look at, and this is how the trees, are going to be laid out right now. We want all your feedback we can possibly get. So, Jason, why don't you take us through a little bit of what the design concept philosophy was behind this talent trees?
Yeah, sure. I'm not going to read this word for word,
sure.
And I encourage you, if you're interested in how what the development team is thinking for this revamp, like, you should read the post, and if you have any familiarity with Druid or DK builds, then you should also read the breakdowns for each of those. But let's talk higher level stuff. They basically stated a lot of stuff about the design philosophy for Dragonflight talents, and I think the overarching concept is they want to increase player agency over your character's progression and build, provide meaningful rewards while leveling, and reinforce your character's connection to both class and spec. Which that all sounds really good to me. I mean, I think these are things that players have been kind of lacking in terms of player agency over progression and build for a while now, I would say, last couple expansions at least. Provide meaningful rewards while leveling has always been sort of not always, but in I would say the last 8-10 years has been sort of an ongoing conversation, and they've made improvements and they've tweaked stuff here and there and they made it better, and the level squish was part of that. But I think this one really brings it back to what old school WoW players mean when they say meaningful rewards while leveling. And reinforce characters' connection to both class and spec, I think, is really important if they can pull that off. Because, like Legion, a thing that felt great was you really felt like you were playing your spec. The specs were so well realized, and they were such a big part of that expansion, and that was intentional, right? Everything was tied to your spec in a lot of ways. And then they walked that back a bunch the last two expansions, but they also funneled a lot of your power out into other systems that were disconnected from your character. So I like this idea that your character has these two elements to its personality, right? It has its class and it has its spec, and both of those things have meaningful contributions to how you play it. Now, they talked a little bit about how the trees are laid out, and because it's not like the old talent trees were in Cataclysm and prior, but it's similar, but it's not the same. They mentioned talents higher in the tree are expected to be more commonly chosen, talents lower in the tree are more optional and geared towards shaping max level builds. So that's not really counterintuitive, I don't think. Like, you kind of work your way down the tree, you pick what you want as you go, and you're sort of aiming towards, these key elements at the bottom that really round out your spec at max level at 60 and then at 70. That seems logical, and we're kind of used to that. That is similar to how those old trees worked. They were just more restrictive than what it sounds like they're shooting for here. They did point out that you don't have a talent tree, you have two. You have a class tree and a spec tree. And your class tree is where you're going to have your core set of abilities that all specs can use. And that's where a lot of your utility choices are going to come in. And then your spec tree is bonuses to make you do your role better. So I think that's a really interesting choice that they decided to go this way. And I think it's good because before we've never had this in any other system, right? Like, you had to pick, you were picking spec talents only.
Yeah.
Even when it was trees, you had 3 different trees, or you had a tree per spec, but they were all different, and there wasn't powers that you were getting out of the talent system that applied across the board. You had to pick and choose like which ones you were investing in and which ones you were passing up. You are still going to have to do that, but having like, okay, all of your utility, all of your class identity, your, your buffs, dispels, battle reses, movement abilities, CC abilities, these are your class abilities. Your, crit strike chance, your block rating, all the stuff that makes you able to do what your role is in your group, that's your spec tree. You're not, and they've been good in recent years about like, okay, our current talent tree system, you're generally not sacrificing straight up role power for utility. Those choices are not in the trees anymore.
Right.
But it's restrictive because your choice is either utility or spec power. This way you get a little bit of both. Blizzard doesn't decide what your build has access to. You do. And that's something we haven't seen in a really long time. So I think it's cool that the pendulum is swinging back this way. They mentioned that, you'll access the talent tree system at level 10, and you'll get starting abilities that you learn as you level up to 10. But after that, most of your abilities are actually going to be obtained via the tree. Some of these are going to be automatically awarded via the class tree, so you don't actually spend points on them, but they just unlock via talents. Or they're talents that you have access to relatively early on, higher up in the tree. You could put your early points into those. So, you're not going to be missing key elements of your, your specs rotation for long periods of time. I think of like, going back to like TBC, you get like devastate until like way down the tree. And it's like, well, that's, kind of a core part of the expectation for Prot Warrior gameplay, for example. So, this is more like, okay, we're going to cover your bases and then let you tweak it. It seems to be the intention here. So I like the way that sounds. Now, one of the problems that we had with spec trees once upon a time, and the kind of free reign on player agency of what your character had access to, was it was possible to create unviable characters. Your build could just be non-functional for the role you were trying to do because you didn't invest your talent points in the correct way. So they had sort of like a mock FAQ, right? These weren't not necessarily like questions that people actually asked them, but they're trying to get out in front of a few sticking points. And one of these was, does this mean it's possible to make very bad builds? Yeah. Bad in quotation marks. And they say, in short, yes. There are limits and guardrails here, such as those abilities that are automatically given. But, you can, and they're trying to set up the trees with intuitive paths that lead you to reasonable builds. They want to keep the player in the driver's seat of their character's growth within their class, but ultimately that means players could make mistakes. Like, they don't want you to fall into traps,
right? Yeah, like there's.
Yeah, I mean, you could legitimately make mistakes if you're missing key power elements, right, in your build. That sure. You will certainly be able to do that. But I think there are the way the modern combat and stat system works. It's also there's some safety net in there because before it was like, well, you didn't put 5 points as talent, so your def rating isn't high enough.
Yeah.
You can get crit. You
Yeah.
can't tank. You have to go respec. I don't think we'll have pitfalls like that. Ultimately, the player is empowered here, which is interesting. It can be dangerous, so you just have to know, like, you have to know your spec. I mean, I think this puts a little bit more onus on the player to know what's appropriate for them, and I think that's okay. I don't think it's bad to allow the player to have the potential to make mistakes, or to make like builds that are not viable traditionally, but yeah, it's just something that players need to be aware of. I mean, we a lot of us use tools to, various resources to figure out how to build characters anyway. So I think the flexibility takes precedence over the possibility that players might make mistakes with their choices. They do say that, the tree contains a spectrum of more basic abilities all the way to comparatively advanced ones. So the thing is, you're probably not going to be respecing 61 points of your tree on a regular basis, right? You're probably going to lock in most of your talents, like your core build, and then you'll have points to flex to move around between stuff that you need to change for dungeon versus raid versus PvP, single target versus two target cleave versus AoE, which sounds good. Like, I want flexibility, but I also don't want to micromanage 61 talent points every time I need to flex something, right? Like,
Sure.
That just seems like good design.
Well, they also, I mean, having presets is just such a crucial thing where, we're going to have multiple presets that we can set and go, hey, this is my Mythic Plus build, and this is my raid build, and this is my, build for when I'm out in the world, and this is whatever it is you want to do, PvP stuff, like that can all be separate builds, and you can create different presets. And so I think that's going to be really helpful as well for that. But I think you're right. I think a lot of your base tree, once you set it in, you won't be doing too much tweaking once it's in there. Overall, I think this is a really neat system. It feels like they really took all of the different systems from Shadowlands when it came to legendaries, when it came to your conduit system, when it came to the talent tree that currently existed for your character, came to your covenant abilities, and kind of went, okay, let's take from all of these and build this talent tree. So overall, for some classes, depending on what covenant you were playing, there's not going to be like a massive, huge, ridiculous shift in class philosophy when it came to how you're going to play your character or what your character does. Is what we're seeing from, obviously, we've only seen a preview of 2 of these trees, and obviously all of this stuff is way far out, so it's all going to get shifted, and the reason why they're releasing it when they did is because they're like, hey, this is what we currently have, we're still working on it, let's get your thoughts, let's start the ball rolling to get people's thoughts, which is always a good idea. So when I look at the Resto Druid one, as an example, you sort of start off with, like, a lot of interesting choices early on, but the crucial, critical things that it comes back to is, like, Convoke is still a choice that you can pick in the tree. You still have options for enhancing up your tranquility so you don't get knocked back when you're tranking. You still have, like, there's a very similar things that they've pulled in from, both legendaries with having your rejuve spread to other targets as a talent you can choose, to conduits with things like I mentioned, the tranquility knockback is a talent, is one of the talent, the 2-minute trank, and tranquility knockback is a talent. So it's cool to see that, but then they can do really interesting things as well with this talent tree, which is something we haven't seen in a very long time, is they're looking at giving Resto Druids an interrupt. You can actually interrupt spells on a Resto Druid, which isn't something we've been able to do for a very long time as a direct interrupt. Maybe, a disorient or a knockback to sort of delay something, but an actual interrupt isn't something they've given us. Now, what they can do is put that interrupt in a place on the tree where you are sacrificing a fair amount of throughput to get that interrupt, right? Like, they can actually choose to do that of, this is your decision. If you want to have this ability to be able to do this, you have to give up a lot of throughput-based talents to do that. And so the choice becomes another very interesting factor that sort of kicks in. And yes, I do know, and as everyone openly admits, that there's going to be 5 or 6 best in slot talent choices that you use for any activity, right? Like, that's just the way it's going to be. There'll be 5 or 6 total. We're going to go through PvP. It's one of these 2. For Mythic Plus, it's this. It's, whatever it is. But for something like Mythic Plus, where often a short, fast interrupt is something that your team is lacking when you're running three, a Resto Druid plus 3 range DPS. You don't have that fast interrupt, and that's something that's very attractive about Shamans, is for a Resto Druid now suddenly you can talent into having Skull Bash and have that interrupt available as a fast interrupt for your character. And I think that's great that this talent system creates that opportunity. So I'm thrilled with the direction they're moving. I'll be interested to see how this all pans out. I'm excited to have talent trees back. I'm excited to have the choice. I like how they're doing it with the ability to enhance particular talents, essentially bringing in conduits to a talent tree, as well as creating meaningful choice towards the end of the trees as to which strong powers you're choosing. I think that's great. And I definitely recommend people checking it out. So I dig this. I think this is a great post about the philosophy behind it. I think it's great they're getting this into our hands early, and I think it's cool to sort of see that like Resto Druids can choose to have a Night Fae Covenant ability, or they can choose to have a Necrolord Covenant ability. Those are the two that they sort of included in the tree. Boomkins didn't get Venthyr. Venthyr wasn't one of the abilities that made its way into the tree, but Convoke did. So, they sort of moved that direction. I think it's interesting to see decisions like that of, well, this was something we don't want to carry forward in the future, and this was something cool that we do want to carry forward into the future. And let people sort of decide what they want to do. And the Convoke version that we're getting is the shortened Convoke version, I believe. So kind of neat to see some of the initial takes on this and what Blizzard's choosing to do with it. I'm just excited to start trying the stuff out in beta once we start seeing beta or alpha start rolling around for it, and really start playing with these talent trees. It's going to be very fun to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Convoke is like just instantly became like an iconic Druid ability, right? Yeah. So it's cool to see it live on, and I think it just even from like a narrative kind of perspective, it kind of ties the Shadowlands more into mainstream World of Warcraft in a good way too. So yeah, I'll be curious to see what other Covenant abilities make their way back in as talents. I mean, a couple things you touched on there, I just wanted to kind of follow up on. Like, part of it is, I think there's some good reason to be optimistic here, because from what they've shown us so far, it seems like they've learned some pretty good lessons from the last couple expansions worth of systems design. It seems like they're in tune with what is cool and what players want access to, and what is worth choosing between, right? Like where a choice can actually be made. So that's one reason to be optimistic. The other reason is they have been pretty receptive to feedback in the last 6 to 8 months on a level that we're not really used to. We've talked about this before, but it's like they did a super long alpha and beta for Shadowlands. They received a ton of negative feedback about various system choices, and they said, we hear you, but ultimately we think we're right. And they just weren't. Like, they weren't, and they flexed on all of it. None of it stayed the way that they drew their line in the sand in beta. And some of those dominoes fell really fast. So my hope is that first of all, I expect alpha to start peeking through pretty soon. 9.25 is out, right? Like, the next thing to be tested is 10.0.
Yeah.
All the patch content, like, you will be playing with reworked talents before Dragonflight comes out, right? You will have up to level 60 talents the day 10.0 comes out. So yeah. I'm expecting that sooner than later. I'm hoping that as players get in there, check the stuff out, try out different builds, different combos, see what restrictions, if any, are holding the system back in terms of flexibility or whatever, that when this stuff gets communicated, that we actually have a dialogue with the devs, and that if something is really glaringly unpopular, that it gets changed before it alienates live game players. I think there's reason to be optimistic about that at this point in time. I hope that doesn't prove to be misplaced, but also, I mean, it seems like they've created a really flexible system, and a lot of stuff that drove everybody up the wall about Shadowlands was how rigid these systems were when they launched. So hopefully they're just avoiding that particular rake entirely. The other thing that you mentioned really speaks to the way that we play WoW in a modern context, about like Resto Druid having the ability to choose between, direct, relatively short cooldown interrupt versus throughput.
Yeah.
It's like, because dungeons and small group content
and
are so prominent, yeah, like it's so much more prominent, I feel like, in the modern game than 10 years ago, or really pre-Keystones.
Yeah.
It's like having that kind of flexibility is perfect, and it's very welcome. That's because that's the problem with the current talent design and stuff that we run into is in dungeon groups. A lot of times you just don't have great tools to deal with things that mobs can do, and it's like, well, the only DPS we had was our 2 warlock buddies, and double warlock is a lot of damage, but we're missing out on other things that we need because they don't bring them and nobody else was on.
Yeah.
It's like, if we can shore some of that up, it just adds more flexibility to how people can play. And even if it's not like super optimal, at least you can perform the mechanical requirement without, being too harshly punished. So I don't know. I think that those are the kind of choices that are welcome, right? Like, this is clearly like, if it's clearly like, okay, this is appropriate for small groups and this is appropriate for large groups, amazing. That's exactly the kind of stuff we want to see. So, yeah, I'm hoping we can get some real hands-on time with this, like, sooner than later. And I hope that they're willing to flex on stuff if there's some glaring problems. I did want to point out a couple kind of mechanical things they threw in at the end just to explain, like, the vision for how the system works as you play through the game.
Before we dive into that, though, there's one other thing we'd be amiss if we didn't mention that we saw with Resto Druid Tree and with all the other trees is Mark of the Wild is coming back. This is a raid-wide buff. And this is getting a lot of attention because people in general dislike raid-wide buffs because it means they feel like if they aren't bringing that particular class, then they don't have all of the buffs that they're supposed to have. And we used to have scrolls, which scribes weep for at this day, because we used to be able to get at least minor versions, lesser versions of those buffs, even if you didn't have that person in the raid, through using scrolls. So it means that we are now in a conversation that's happening around the game, and we'll have to see where the feedback goes, about whether or not that's a good thing that Mark of the Wild is coming back. I personally love it. It means I probably have a raid spot, and it's going to be easier to get into groups, and there's a motivation for bringing druids, and it, is great utility, and it's something that's makes the class attractive, so that's great. But I do see the concern of, we already have Fort and Int and these other things, and should these buffs even exist in the game? And if they do exist in the game, and if Mark of the Wild is being added back, how does that affect boss tuning? Are bosses being tuned around players having 0 buffs, or are they being tuned around players having Fort, Mark of the Wild, and Arcane Intellect, and Battle Shout, and like all of these other buffs applied onto their characters? Because you may not have all of those buffs in your group, especially with flex rating and different group sizes, depending on what difficulty you're playing the game at. You're not necessarily going to have all of those buffs, and that's something that is just an active conversation. So I felt it'd be amiss if we didn't just address the fact that is an active conversation. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, and whether or not we continue to see even more buffs added to the game for other classes, or whether we see them sort of back off that a little bit, or maybe even add in something like scribes having scrolls back. Who knows? Any of those things are possible, so we'll just see where it goes. But sorry, Jason, you were going to wrap up some mechanic stuff.
Sure. But anyway, Feral Druid's rejoicing, I'm sure, bringing a raid. I mean, I think, one solution could be to make like a somewhat generic buff that multiple different classes bring a version of. So you have like an attack power buff, you have like a stats buff, you have an intellect buff, you could have, druids and paladins can bring like a Mark of the Wild type buff, and warriors and monks could bring like a attack power buff or something. Like, there are solutions to the problem. Scrolls are another one. Like, I think raid wide buffs add cool flavor and feel like World of Warcraft to me,
I
because
agree.
we've mostly had them for so long. But I think there are just ways to design your way out of the corner of like, well, what if we don't have this buff? Well, just let somebody make a consumable that gives it to you for an hour. Like, we've done all of these things in the past too. We've had the consumables, we've had the generic buffs that overwrite each other. Like, just let people push buttons and make their friends stronger. It just feels good, even if it's ultimately like, you could remove it all, right? And you could just say, we don't have any buffs at all. you just go in like vanilla. We don't even have food buffs anymore. You don't need any of this stuff. The tuning accounts for this, but like it's a role playing game. You want to feel like that connection to your character and to your party. You want to feel that kind of interaction with other characters and with the game world. So, I think there are ways to do it that don't feel like you're leaving something on the table. So hopefully they do something like that. But yeah, in terms of like how we're going to actually interface with the system, right? At level 10, you unlock the system and you get your first class tree point. Your first spec tree point is at level 11, and then it alternates every level. At level 70, you have 31 class points and 30 spec points. Certain basic abilities in the class tree are given automatically to players of particular specs and do not cost any points. Most talents have prereqs, so they're indicated by arrows in the UI. You can kind of see this in some of the screenshots of like arrows pointing at different talents. Obviously, none of this stuff is final.
Yeah.
If a talent has any arrows leading to it, you must have fully purchased at least one of the previous talents to access it. And arrows always point downwards or diagonally downwards as from what they're currently doing. So an arrow will never go like up and to the left from where you came from down to it or whatever. Also, every tree has certain rows you can't advance past until you spend a certain number of talent points. So this is not totally unlike old school talent trees.
Yeah.
Except before, old school talent trees had like every row was like that, right? Like you had to spend X number of points in order to unlock the next row, essentially. This is a bit more curated. There's going to be certain ones that don't require you to spend X number of points to continue down the tree, and there's going to be some rows that do. So there will be indicators that, explain that as you work your way down. And then if you look at some of the, I want to call them mock-ups. I guess they're like work in progress, screenshots of what the UI looks like. There are some talents that have like an octagonal border around them, and they are a choose one, basically. You can pick one of the two choices at a time. You can't have them both active at once. So
an example of that is Incarnation and Convoke are on the same swap. You have to pick between the two right now inside the talent tree.
Right. So there's going to be situations where like at a particular spot in the tree, you do not have free reign to pick literally anything you would like.
Yeah.
There are some things you have to choose between, but I mean, overall, this is a much more flexible system, seemingly. I mean, at this point, from what we know about it, what they're saying about it, what the stated goals are, what the design is looking like, this is way more flexible than anything we've seen in the last two expansions. I kind of leave Legion out of it because artifact talents the artifact traits were not really flexible. You just bought them all until you had them all and powered them up, right? So there wasn't a lot of choice there. The talent system was the Mists of Pandaria talent system. So that is, you can choose whatever you want at any time you want to switch it up, but it doesn't let you do anything outside the bounds of the combos that they've created, right? There's like a limited number of things that you can put together.
Yeah.
This will open that up a lot more, and you can really build your spec choices around either your own play style or the needs of the content that you feel like playing at any particular time. So, man, and also I don't think there's any conduit energy involved in making these choices or changing them. So, wonderful stuff. I can't wait to see the Warrior one. Like that, I feel like the Warrior one's the only one I can really absorb and internalize and go, okay, I can have like opinions about this, or I can think about like what this means for my play style. So, I can't wait to see the rest of them, and hopefully we'll get some alpha news sooner than later.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, next little news article we want to cover is the roller coaster that is rated PvP cross-faction. All right. This was really interesting, and for those of you who didn't try and dive into the rated PvP cross-faction, you probably had no idea this was going on, unless some of your friends were doing it and they're being very vocal about it, because the issues were pretty staggering with what went live. Because people were in rated arenas considered to be on the same team if you're the same faction, there were interactions like you queuing up against another team with one person of either faction, and your spells just wouldn't hit the person of the same faction as you because they were considered friendly. So you couldn't cast on them. They were friendly. Right. You couldn't attack them. That was one of the things. There was a huge variety of issues that this sort of played out to. Even cases where the person who was on your team you couldn't interact with in a way that was beneficial. So it was pretty weird to have these issues. So they basically put up cross-faction, went, whoops, that's not working, took down rated PvP cross-faction. And then yesterday they were like, hey, we're continuing. Well, actually, so it was a few days ago. They were like, hey, we're continuing to work on it. And then this morning, during today's maintenance, they actually fixed it and re-enabled tentatively cross-faction, basically saying, hey, we're going to keep watching this very closely throughout the day. If we see these things popping up again, we will then take it away again so we can continue to try and fix it. But yes, if you were someone who tried rated PvP last week, cross-faction, it didn't work out for you, you can give it a go again this week and see if it's all fixed up for you or not. That, to me, was one of those cases where you're like, yep, this is the case of when you implement something that the game was never designed around implementing, these things can happen, where you're like, yeah, you ended up facing off against other Alliance or Horde players, and you can't attack people of the same faction inside this arena. So, whoops, okay, we'll just have to try and resolve that. So, yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't the last rodeo for problems like this. I mean,
yeah,
again, this is why they did it this summer when, the game is relatively quiet otherwise, and they can work on this stuff. So, yeah, the thing about like guilds getting disbanded, that was surprising to me. That was weird.
Really weird. Yeah.
The other stuff, all the other, like the maintenance and the stuff with like friendliness versus hostility, whatever, with other players, that stuff hasn't surprised me because I figured that would break. So, at least they're communicating about it and, doing things to try to resolve it. So, as of this morning, you can get back in there and try it out, and hopefully it'll be working okay.
Yeah. Okay. We actually have some classic news that we wanted to cover real quick. This is pretty major, impactful, large classic news, which is why we're most certainly covering it here. Burning Crusade Classic Realms are being consolidated coming August 9th. So you have a couple months before we start seeing a whole list of servers. They have Anathema, Bigglesworth, Blomu, whatever you want to say, Deviant Delight, Fairbanks, Fellstriker, Heartseeker, Harad, Incendious, Kurtonos, Cromcrush, Kuranax, Lotheb, Netherwind, Rattlegore, Reaper, Scarum, Smolderweb, Stalag, Sulthraze, Thalnos, and Thunderfury. All of those servers are being retired, and they are going to then take the player bases from those servers and put them onto higher population realms so that they can actually have very active servers. It's important that they feel it's important to maintain really active populations. And so basically any of these servers that have dropped down to low population, they're just retiring and consolidating. I think this also speaks a little bit to, hey, we're freeing up server space and servers for potentially Wrath of the Lich King classic stuff going on. They could just allocate a lot of resources differently, but more importantly, this basically moves all these players into realms that are going to be higher population. So there's more going on, more active economies, more people to participate in groups in and do stuff with. So I, from an outside point of view, see this as a really positive thing. However, understand that I am not someone who is actively playing Classic. And so if you have reasoning to believe this is a terrible, horrible, oh my goodness thing, I understand and sympathize that this is not what you're looking for. I certainly would feel very attached to the server that I started on, because I still am attached to the original OG WoW server that I started on, which is Medivh. And if something ever happened to Medivh and it was going away forever, I would feel very sad that this piece of, important, this place that I sort of called home, basically, it would be going away. So just, hear my sympathies if that's something. But yeah, we wanted to give everyone the heads up, a couple months out. Player characters that are automatically moved during the realm consolidation on August 9th may be unavailable for up to 2 weeks thereafter. Just as another heads up, when they do this consolidation, it might break your ability to play the game on that character for a couple of weeks. So you might want to consider doing some sort of move ahead of time if you want to guarantee that this goes smooth for you. I would also expect that depending on how they do these mergers, since they're retiring the old servers, it's not just cross-realm that's happening. They're not merging servers together in that sense. You might require name changes involved in this as well, because multiple characters on the same server with the same name doesn't work unless they are of opposite faction. So this could be another situation where moving earlier to sort of claim your name on a high pop server might be something you want to do. Just keep that in mind as well. Apparently, all the realms in the list above currently have free character transfers available to multiple active destinations. So it's not like you're paying for the transfer that we're talking about, doing it ahead of time. They're just actively encouraging you to do it and giving you your deadline to do it by. So I would get with your friends and start discussing where you want to move to if you're on any of the servers that we listed earlier in the show.
Yep. Also, I should point out, this is NA realms. There was also, I saw a published list of EU realms that I did not include in the notes.
Okay.
So just check the post for your region and make sure that if your realm is affected, coordinate with your friends and just get off these servers as soon as you can.
Yeah.
You don't want to forget, and then you want to play the game and you can't because you're locked out because your character's in limbo. And then I don't know what they do with it at that point. They just reassign you and they just put you on like the lowest pop realm left or whatever.
You and your friends could get split up onto different servers.
Happen, you don't want that to happen. So just coordinate with your TBC crowd and pick a server if you're on one of these affected servers and go there. I think this is kind of inevitable, right? There are so many Classic servers, and like Classic has an audience for sure. It has a dedicated audience, and it probably always will. But it had a lot of hype, and it was the new shiny for a minute a few years ago, and they had to add way more servers than they originally planned on because so many people pre-registered, and it's too many servers for them to keep alive in this environment forever. Especially when
it affects the experience, right? Because your experience is you went from a high pop server at the very beginning, and now it's dwindled all the way down to low. Like it's gonna feel vacant and void, and it's gonna be hard to acquire things and get groups for stuff, and like that's just not as much fun.
I mean, it's necessary for Burning Crusade. Like you don't have the cross realm tools, you don't have match made tools in large degree, not for some activities, but not for everything. So. Yeah, it's your server is vital to your gameplay experience on these realms, in Classic, TBC Classic. So got to get out of there as soon as you can. And I'm curious, once this is done and these realms are retired, what are they going to have the server team work on next? Because we kind of need some retail, if not consolidation. We need some connected realms. We need maybe just some communication about potential changes to the back end of the game. We haven't had realm connections in about 2 years now. Medium and low pop realms are really struggling with the player exodus over the last 2 years. I personally would kind of like to see traditional server structure just go away. If they had some way that I could just invite any player that wanted to be into my guild, regardless of what server any of us played on, that would be great. Some kind of unified auction house structure where like I could have a market for my goods, and I could also have access to a market of goods. That would be great. My dinky little 2-server group that nobody plays on is not really getting the job done in any of these regards anymore. And my preference would be to stay where I'm at. I mean, you kind of mentioned like, feeling that sort of connection and, to your home realm. Like the realm I play on is not the first realm I ever played on, but I have been on it since shortly after it opened in like 2008. And I've been there ever since. And I would prefer to like stay on my realm and just have the gameplay experience improve because of, tech upgrades. But if not, I don't know. I mean, would it even be such a bad thing except for the name change conversation? And maybe they could just assign your character a last name that is the server it came from.
That'd be interesting.
I don't know. But like, is realm consolidation out of the question for live realms? And I feel like the answer is just no. Like the realm structure in general for this game is outdated. And it's so inequitable. The big realms are huge. It's a completely different experience in terms of these things, and they just get bigger and consume smaller realms, and then the smaller realms are consuming get slightly bigger. They start consuming like medium-sized realms because people realize like, okay, we need to be in a place where we can recruit and where we have an economy. And this is important even in a live game, but in TBC, it's essential. Your realm is the entire game to you, essentially. So without any population or without a sustainable population, you really can't play the game in any way. Now, it could be possible that there are communities on these servers that are robust enough that they sustain themselves, and that does suck. Like that's a shame for those players that it just kind of worked out that way. Like if you have to take your whole community and move to a different place and reestablish yourself, that's obnoxious. But obviously they have the data and they know which realms are just not being populated.
Yeah. Okay. With that, hot fixes. Just a few to cover here that we wanted to cover. Rygolon, 5% less health on Mythic, easier to kill. 15% less auto attack damage on all difficulties. Like, straight up, can we get that on Jailer, please? Like, Jailer is still at a situation where if our tank is not above 90% hit points, one melee attack will kill our tank. 140k, 130k melee swings. Just a swing.
Yep.
Basically, tank is at full health, taunts the boss off of the other tank, takes a melee hit, goes to 5% hit points, lay on hands, back up to full, next melee hit, back down low again. Like, that's what the health bar does in these situations.
Right.
It's spooky as all get out from a healing perspective. So, yeah, it's weird to see, like, just default melee swings hitting that hard. Rygolon has a pretty hard one to begin with. So, yeah, they're trying to scale that down a little bit.
Yeah, the thing with Rygolon, too, is Rygolon attacks really fast.
Yeah.
And Rygolon does corrupted strikes very frequently. It's a very quick cooldown ability. So your tank gets hit with the corrupted strikes. You're now taking a dot based on how hard you got hit with corrupted strikes for, and then Rygolon's meleeing again already. So like without really crisp tank swaps, like taking melees while you're corrupted striked it hurts. So yeah, this is big for sure. I think Rygolon is one of the more straight up punishing tank fights. So interesting to see it rolled back a bit. I haven't done any of the nerfed Sepulcher because I've just been living on Skolex and Jailer.
Yeah. Well, as far as Mythic Plus goes, this patch, they resolved an issue that was causing some creatures and abilities to not scale with Mythic Plus Keystones as intended. However, as a result of this, it meant that they unintentionally increased the health and damage of those creatures. So they then had to go back through and nerf things by like 60% and 40% as far as health and damage and things like that go. Nothing went up, just to be clear. As far as the changes they went back through, they nerfed everything from where it had been changed to. So this is everything from like Zofex inside Streets of Wonder has 5% reduced health. He does 66% reduced damage with security measure and 60% reduced damage with armed security damage. So like they just went in and went, all right, we got to just like tune this back to where it was supposed to be before all of this sort of like correct scaling patch that went in fixed it. So yeah, they basically buffed everything by accident and then nerfed it back to where it should be. That was what ended up happening.
It was bugged, so once the scaling got corrected, then it was actually way overtuned, so they had to nerf it to make it back the way it was.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say, Wednesday night, we didn't play Tuesday. Wednesday night before these came down, we did a Halls of Atonement 20, and high adjudicator release wasn't really a problem. But it was also not Fort Week, and that is like one of the easiest dungeon bosses in this pool. So probably would have hurt pretty bad this week if it didn't get fixed.
Yeah.
There was also a funny bug. I just want to touch on this really quick. On the world bosses, where you could gain the Faded Raid Aura buff while fighting Shadowlands world bosses, resulting in a more difficult than intended experience. Like, you're not supposed to be getting the Season 4 world boss buff right now. So, yeah, that's pretty funny that was popping up.
That is actually quite amusing that that's in the game and is available to pop up. Another fix they put in is players who unlocked the Dark Iron Dwarf Heritage Armor on one character can now unlock the Heritage Armor and weapons and mount on a different character. So just keep that in mind, that's now, if you are someone who has a collection of dwarves, you can now properly do that on, or have that on multiple characters, which is great. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, it doesn't matter which tune you did it on to begin with. Just bring one of your level 50 Dark Irons down there.
Yeah. And then the last point is for trinket users, particularly tanks, very solemn thing. The Codex of the First Techniques was a trinket that a lot of people really enjoyed using and did a ton of damage for tanks. And it bugged out last week. And the bug basically caused a lot of interesting, weird stuff to happen, but made it fairly unusable as far as its damage just wasn't where it was supposed to be. The Brewmaster, for example, Codex of the First Technique used to do damage based off of the stagger damage that the Brewmaster was taking, which was pretty crazy to be able to have it proccing that frequently and proccing off of stagger damage. So they fixed that. They fixed the trinket, but their fix was its maximum absorb was not increasing with the trinket's item level. And it was unintentionally reflecting damage from allies or dead enemies. So they fixed it by making it worse than it initially was. So now it's fairly unusable. So if you're someone who's like, I love my Codex of the First Technique, and then you're logging in this week and going, I just don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing damage-wise or healing-wise or whatever it is, it's the trinket. You gotta swap the trinket out with something else. It's no longer as strong as it used to be. Keep that in mind and potentially look for something else to use instead.
Yeah, it's a shame because it was pretty good. It was a pretty decent set and forget trinket for a while because you don't have to do anything with it. You just equip it and then you engage in combat. And I was using it for a while, but yeah, it's really not. It's pretty much not viable at the state that they have now put it into for most players and most specs. So yeah, the problem is there are so many bad tank trinkets in this expansion.
A lot of them.
Your options are just so underwhelming. Like blood spattered scale, yes. If you can get one, if you can power through until you get one, like use that. And that is still very good. The other one that's really good that I am using this for group content is the Shard of Anhild's Aegis from Sanctum of Domination, which I only have at 239. But the absorb is so big, and it does a fair bit of damage if the damage absorb pops. Like, it's still one of your best options for a lot of different tank specs. So I guess the cool thing is hopefully something like that shard will be on the vendor in season 4. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would. I mean, yeah, that'd be huge if they included it.
I would like to see just better tank trinket design in Dragonflight. I think it's been, it's something that sort of comes and goes and has been a problem on and off for years. Usually tank trinket design is very weak. I don't want to say that the design is poor or bad because it's intentional. Tanks do not have strong trinket options typically early in expansions. And I remember using like time walking vendor trinkets and stuff as expansion started up because they just provided the most flat damage reduction of anything available. It's not, that's not ideal, but that's the way it goes. You use whatever the math says is the right thing to use. And then, they ramp up over the life of an expansion and they add some good ones and stuff. But this expansion in particular has really felt weird because the scale has been so predominant and there have been other decent options. I've used a lot of DPS trinkets as my second trinket, like as long as it had strength on it or something. If it provided me some benefit, fine, let's do it. But like they have these other tank trinkets in the pool that are just so much worse than the scale. And they even buffed all of those and nerfed scale, and scale is still better. And then you're shooting for outdated raid trinkets to round out with, it's not a great feeling. So I would like to see things that just have more like reliable benefits for tanks to use as trinkets. And really what I would like is powerful defensive options from trinkets, because I think defending myself from damage is a fun part of the gameplay for me. Like, that's part of what I like about playing the role. I don't want to just put in like stat sticks so I do slightly more damage. I want more interactivity. So that would be on my wish list. It's a shame the way Codex ended up. I would like my Valor back, please, even though I really have nothing to spend it on anymore. But yeah.
Yeah. I can say this much, that the Weave of Warped Fates is going to be on everyone's list for that vendor coming into... every tank's list for that vendor coming into next season, because it is still on everyone's list currently, and that drops off Fate Scribe, which people really don't like killing. So
yeah,
it's one of those trinkets that I think everyone would desperately want. That's one where if an attack would kill you by less than a certain set amount of damage, depending on what item level the trinket was, what difficulty you got it off of, then instead you're returned to, essentially full life. You get all your life back. It's a cheat death for tanks, which is massive when you're taking 100 and something K swings. Most often it kills you by like 8,000 or 6,000 damage, which means this essentially saves the entire pull for that pull on that boss as a trinket. But it drops off Fate Scribe, so you got to go get one, which is kind of the big pain. So it
might be really attractive in season 4, depending on how hard we're getting hit. It's going to depend a lot on the relative tuning of everything and how our power level feels. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting just to see, like, not just for tank specs, but just across the board, like what kind of items are actually on the season 4,
the whole vendor setup.
Vendors, like when it all goes live, like what are they actually like pointing us in the direction of? Because that'll be kind of telling too.
Yeah, it will be. All right, folks, with that, we're going to play a quick sounder for our patrons, and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. Today, I'm giving a special shout out to Arajian, Celian, Infark, Kapawi, Mibble the Mighty, Nick, and Shorel. Thank you. This sounder is for you. Wow, that was me being muted. Okay. Sorry, folks. That's right. So if you're looking for our Patreon, you can find it over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. And thank you so much to our newest patrons, Uncle Vinny and Cade L. All of the support from our patrons is always appreciated and goes back into the show when it comes to paying for technologies and hosting and all the associated costs for running the show. And it lets us host really fun events like our patron Q&A episode that will be coming up later this month. So I'm looking forward to doing that and chatting with you all during that opportunity. So if you guys are, I'll send the reminder again, if you guys are listening to the show and you're like, oh yeah, this cool thing happened in the game and I had a question about it and I wanted to know or tell a story about it, write it down. If I don't write down the fun stuff that happens during my week of World of Warcraft, I don't remember the fun stuff that happened during my week of Warcraft when the show comes around. I actually, some of my best stories are ones that I write down or add to show notes like on Wednesday or Thursday when they actually occurred to me, than the ones that I sort of try and remember on the spot. So if you have a question or something, you can submit it whenever you want, just through our Discord, startingzone.com/Discord. You can submit it there, or you can submit it through Patreon, and we will add it to that actual episode. If you can make it on the show, later on live, that's great. You can ask the question yourself there live. But if you write it down ahead of time or you send it in ahead of time, you're just making sure that it makes it on the show. So, as again, always appreciate our patrons. Looking forward to chat with you later this month.
Yeah, welcome new patrons, and thanks for all the support. And yeah, always fun to have those chats with our patrons, and we never know what we're going to get into. And man, I feel like there's so much to talk about around Warcraft these days in general, just with everything going on with the live game, with Dragonflight looming, with stuff around, Warcraft as a concept, not necessarily inside of WoW. So yeah, we'll get something on the schedule in the next couple weeks. And yeah, thank you guys for supporting the show.
Yeah. All right, if you folks have enjoyed this episode of The Starting Zone, consider heading on over to your iTunes, your Apple Podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review. They really help out our show, and we love reading them here live on the show. This one comes from Sam, entitled Great Podcast. It says, as a returning player, listening has helped me navigate through all the intricacies of the game. We're a long way from Cataclysm. Spencer and Jason go into the perfect level of detail on things that I'm sure are commonplace for both of them, but may not be as clear to others. Thanks. Well, Sam, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for submitting a review. We really appreciate it. These reviews help raise us up those charts and let more people find our show and help us land big guests and, fun stuff with the show. So reviews are very important to our show. We appreciate the 5 stars when we can get them on your iTunes or Apple Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for writing in, taking the time, and welcome back, Cataclysm. That's a long break. That was, geez. That's been a good 10 years.
I mean, think about Diablo 3 came out during Cataclysm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a minute. So welcome back, and glad we could help you find your way through.
Yeah, I just remember that because of the promotion that got everyone to sign on for a year. You got Diablo 3 for free if you committed to a year of subscription with World of Warcraft. So you also got like the Tyrael charger and all that sort of stuff associated with it too. So that was a promo, and I will always associate Diablo 3 with Cataclysm because of that. So yeah. All right, folks, that's going to wrap up episode 523 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out the show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Twitter, or you can find our Discord, like I mentioned earlier, thestartingzone.com/Discord. If you want to get your hands on some TSZ gear, some shirts and mugs and stickers and that kind of stuff, you can head on over to TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/thestartingzone. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwall, always talking WoW and whatever else I'm getting into. And you can find me streaming WoW over twitch.tv/Shieldwall. Probably no streams this week. We'll see. Maybe Sunday or something, but probably pick up stream in another couple weeks here.
Yes. And if you're trying to find me, you can find me over on Twitch as well at twitch.tv/SpencerHD. And I stream all of our Mythic Raid stuff is what's been going on so far. And so if you want to see a jailer kill for a first time for a team, that's happening this week. That'll be either tonight or tomorrow, hopefully. And we will knock that out, and then we'll be done and free. And I imagine we will probably take at least a week to if not longer, off from raiding after doing this. This has been one of the longest progression tiers we've ever experienced. So it'll be nice to be done it and past it. So there'll be some very relieved people. I know a lot of people are very excited about Classic. A lot of our raid team's going to bounce over and do Classic things for a little while. So it's been interesting to sort of see the state that we've all sort of come to mentally. Now, you can also find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey. But outside of that, Jason and myself, I want to say thanks for listening, and job's done.